Welcome to another episode of Open Mic with yours truly, where we feature some of our ANU law alumni and the amazing paths they've taken. Today, I'm talking with arts and law alum Will Fitzgibbon. Will's an investigative journalist, reporter for the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists. He's based in Washington, D.C. He's worked on a number of projects with a focus on tax evasion, money laundering, and corruption. If any of you guys have ever heard about the Panama Papers, that's one of Will and his team's works. Will, I'm so glad to have you join me today, and I hope you're doing well.
Hey, Mike. Good to be here. Thanks very much for the invitation.
I gave a quick intro, but for our listeners and for our alumni community, in your words, can you tell me a little bit about yourself, explain a bit further what you do, and kind of what motivates you?
Yeah, sure. And good job getting the name of my organization right. It's a bit of a mouthful. I work as a reporter for the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists, ICIJ, and it's a bit of an unusual beast. We're a non-profit news organization based in the United States. And what we do is we report and coordinate large-scale international investigations that involve usually 200, 300, or 400 journalists. So you mentioned the Panama Papers. That's definitely our best-known investigation. For those of you who've forgotten or don't know, that was a investigation of about 400 journalists, and we all published at the same time, that took about 11 million leaked records from a particular law firm headquartered in Panama that exposed how presidents, politicians, criminals, fraudsters, celebrities had been using shell companies or secretive companies and vehicles in tax havens like the British Virgin Islands and like Panama to hide or obscure assets, but also to commit crimes. And that project, the Panama Papers, was incredibly powerful and hard-hitting. Mm-hmm. You might remember that there were politicians who resigned as a result of that. Many people have gone to jail. Governments around the world have been able to collect, as a result of that investigation, over $1 billion. And also Meryl Streep was in a movie based on it. Mm. So that's one example of the kind of work that we do at ICIJ. So I kind of wear two hats, if you want. I'm both a reporter who writes my own stories, but then I work for this organization whose mission really is to improve and increase visibility to international investigations. We exist kind of because, as no one will be surprised to learn, journalism around the world is going through a really tough patch. You know, trust me, if I wanted a good paying job after ANU Law School, I would have become a lawyer and not a journalist. I think I totally freaked out my parents when I announced to them that I wasn't going to be following the law career path.
Yeah.
But, you know, this job, what I'm doing now in DC, I really can't imagine anything more rewarding or more fun than it is. And I also like to think that my law studies have helped me get here.
You've worked on, you know, the Panama Papers, as you've mentioned. You've worked on other notable projects like, you know, I think I was reading about the Fatal Attraction, West Africa Leaks, Paradise Papers. What attracts you to these kinds of projects?
I think what I really love about long-form investigative journalism, as distinct, say, from being a reporter on breaking news, is that I have the time, the resources, and the mission to really dig into something that hasn't been exposed before. I suppose what motivates me and what is the basis of my job is revealing and telling the public something that a powerful person or a powerful entity doesn't want us to know about.
Right.
And that to me is the litmus test of a good investigation. And I guess I'm just someone who is very motivated by inequality and lack of accountability. You know, whether or not it's Apple, which is a huge money-making tax avoidance vehicle, or if it's an Australian mining company in a small country in West Africa that has been mistreating its workers or mistreating local residents, or if it's a crook, a fraudster who stole $100,000 from an average citizen. All of my work, I suppose, centers around trying to get to the bottom of what happened and then putting into the public domain the truth, ideally in a way that people enjoy reading or learning about.
In your experience, what has been some of the coolest things you've encountered in doing your research, in working on these? There's a lot of I guess connected people and high ranking people, as you mentioned, that's connected to all of these things, right? Like what's been some of the coolest things you've found out that you can I guess that you can say on air? I don't want to get you in trouble.
Sure. I mean, look, I must have seen hundreds of uber threatening lawsuits in my time working at ICIJ. Like every project we do, including our most recent project, which is called the FinCEN Files, like we will get these enormous letters from very fancy lawyers around the world threatening to sue us within an inch of our life. That's not fun, but it certainly keeps things exciting. I think what I'll never get over or get tired of is when you're at that point in research or an investigation, you've maybe worked on something for 6 months, you've got all your ducks in a row, and then you have the moment of having to make a phone call or sending an email or a letter to the person you're right about, asking them, do you wish to comment on what seems to be corruption or what seems to be fraud? And seeing how they respond is pretty epic. I remember getting woken up at 5:30 a.m. one morning by a former Nigerian oil minister who's, by the way, already been in jail for corruption, so he didn't have much of a reputation to defend. And he was shouting at me on the phone, trying to explain to me that, well, it wasn't possible that I set up a Panama offshore company because I've never been to Panama, which, as anyone who's listening will probably know, is not really a logical connection.
Yeah.
But I kind of enjoy those moments of confrontation. And confrontation, I don't mean in a competitive kind of way, but just me doing my job. All I do to people is say, here are the facts that I've got. As a responsible journalist, I'm inviting you to comment on those in case I've got it wrong, or so that the reader can have both sides of the story. And I always find a pretty enjoyable moment, no matter how stressful it is. This job gives me lots of sleepless nights for sure.
Yeah, I could imagine. Now I just want to circle back a little bit. You mentioned earlier that your parents kind of freaked out when you didn't go through the traditional law path. You have an arts and law degree from ANU. Can you tell us a little bit about that journey and why you pursued journalism and why you pursued this career as a reporter? How, if at any point, did your ANU experience kind of shape your views and your outlook into what you wanted out of everything, out of your career, out of your life?
Sure. I mean, I think my ANU career is even more bizarre or circuitous than the one you mentioned, because I actually started a Bachelor of Music because I was dreaming of becoming an orchestral bassoon player for a little while. So I did that for a year. Then I went into arts law. And I suppose journalism was always at the back of my mind, but like so many good ANU arts law students, my first and foremost goal was to become a DFAT grad student, which I did get an offer for, by the way. So, yes to that. But journalism was always at the back of my mind. I loved writing and I loved reporting, I suppose. I mean, my lecturers will tell you that I was far from being the star of the class in contract law, tort law, admin law. What I really enjoyed, and I think what I was quite good at, was the written elements of some law classes. I remember corporations law, I think, bombed totally in the first part of the exam, but the second part of the exam had a question about should corporations have human rights? And I kind of just waxed lyrical on that for a few pages. And if I remember correctly, did okay. And then, ANU was a very useful breeding ground for many of my interests, because my recollection of ANU College of Law is that it's a very flexible one that had lots of students, staff, and an atmosphere of encouraging people to to perceive of law in the broadest sense possible. I would not have thrived or survived in a law school where 99.9% of graduates were expected to go to fresh fields, for example. I enjoyed the fact that, international law was such a big, huge interest there, and it certainly was for me. I took all the international law classes I could. My dissertation I did as an honours student with Professor Margaret Thornton was totally wacky. Like, I looked at the Khmer Rouge Tribunal in Cambodia and one of its sentences there, and I compared those or analysed that sentence through the prism of some Shakespeare plays, which,
that sounds really interesting.
I had a really good time, and I love the fact that Professor Thornton also thought it was a cool idea and supported me through it. But I think that to me shows why ANU was a good fit for someone like me who would go on to journalism. Because journalism is a bit like as a journalist, you're a bit like a bowerbird, those birds that kind of pick things up from here and there. And to me, I think that's what ANU College of Law allowed me to do as well. Like, I'm really grateful and glad that I've got some training and experience in, the quote unquote serious or traditional legal fields. I know how to read a judgment. I can, write language that sounds like a lawyer if I need to, I suppose. But what I really enjoyed getting out of it was all of that exploratory legal training. I remember I took Japan and the law, I think, as a class in one of my final years at ANU College of Law. And all of that, I think, just helped build up my abilities and interests. And I have to say, having a law degree was, I think, the main reason I got my first journalism job in the first place. That was in the UK after I'd left Australia in like 2011. And this editor in the UK basically took a punt on me. He looked at my profile and he thought, oh, that's interesting. Here's a guy who wants to be a journalist, but he doesn't have a traditional journalism degree. He's got a law degree. Let's see if we can make that work. So having studied law got my foot in the door, and I guess I've just been pushing it open ever since.
Yeah, that's great. I guess all those readings come in handy when you're up late at night and doing research on whatever project you're working on, right?
Yep, totally.
Good training.
Totally.
I guess circling back to the journalism, you've mentioned earlier that the freedom of press and freedom of information is kind of at this, the day and age we're living in. A lot of it is suppressed or held hostage in numerous countries around the world. We're seeing it in a lot of different places where information is also misused and manipulated to spread fake news that benefit different social political groups, right? What are some of your thoughts on these issues, and how do you think we as a society can do better moving forward?
I mean, it's a really, really serious problem out there. I now, of course, work and live in the United States, where fake news has become just a normal word or phrase that people throw around, and I absolutely hate that. And I would encourage anyone who ever thinks of saying the word or the phrase fake news out loud just to check themselves and make sure they're using it in the right context, because as part of my job, I work with hundreds of journalists around the world. I spend lots of my time, say, in countries like Liberia, in Niger, in Nigeria, in Kenya. And I see how fake news has been weaponized by powerful people and those in government to crack down on, to imprison, and even to kill journalists in certain countries around the world. So fake news is not something... It's not a concept that I think we should make light of or laugh at when President Donald J. Trump or others use it, because it really does have trickle-down effects on journalists who, in most countries, earn very little money and put themselves in serious harm's way. On the other side of the coin, fake news has emerged as a popular term, I think, for good and obvious reasons. Journalism and the media industry has a lot to reproach itself for and has made many mistakes in general. I think what I try and do and what my organisation ICIJ does is try and give people reminders as to why journalism matters and why we can and should trust it. I think long gone are the days when a journalist like me would just expect you or a reader to believe me simply because I'm a journalist. What I try and do is kind of show more how the sausage is made. Here's a 12-month investigation. Here's what we did to be able to report or say what we are now saying. And I think taking readers or viewers or listeners along for the ride as journalists more, and not treating the public as kind of acquiescent receivers of information is all going to help us value and appreciate journalism more, which I think is a point that we need to get to.
I'm nearing the end of my questions, but before I get into my last question, Will, what's next for you?
I'm loving working and living in the United States. There are a few reasons that ICIJ is based here. One is freedom of the press is incredibly strong in the United States. Unfortunately, the same cannot be said in Australia. Yeah. The amount of stories that I'm able to write here and to write here safely about powerful people doing crappy things simply would not be possible in Australia, where defamation law is just such a crippling agent on the ability of journalists to tell stories that matter. And I also really love American journalism. It's lyrical, it's narrative, it's got this kind of creative side to it that I really enjoy. So for the moment, I'm very happy.
You took a non-traditional path, right? Like after your ANU degree, after law school, you went into journalism, you went into reporting. What advice would you give students who are likely entering a very different landscape once they've finished with university? And what do you think? How do you think they can stand out and make a difference?
I would simply recommend that people identify clearly what their interests and their passions are, and then they seek ways to bring those interests and passions to life and to make a virtue of it. I was not a trained journalist, but the best advice I ever got when I asked someone what I should do to start on that path was, Will, the best and most sellable thing you've got is your free time and your enthusiasm. So I signed up for an internship, didn't get any money for it. And I know that's a luxury that many of us don't have, but that was how I got my start as a journalist. And just being confident in, I suppose, my uniqueness and my interests in a way that helped me stand out. And even if it seems small to you, I think, what might seem small to you, a particular interest or maybe a few weeks or a month of experience doing something somewhere, use that to your advantage. Don't sell yourself short. If there's anything that living in America has taught me, it's that Australians have a terrible habit of downplaying their skills and their assets. And it's taken me many years to realize that doesn't fly in America or in the rest of the world. And I think coming from ANU, coming from Australia, we often have very good stories to tell about what we've done, experiences that we've had. And I've found that there's lots of global interest in our kinds of profiles.
Will, that's all I have. I know you're very busy. Thank you again for taking the time with me to share your story to our alumni community. All the best in whatever you do next and whatever project you're currently working on. And hopefully the next time we have a chat, it's in person. Maybe we're having a cup of coffee somewhere in the US or maybe even here in Australia.
That sounds good. I do miss Australian coffees. Thanks for the interview, Mike.
No worries.